Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, What Turns You On? I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, July 1st. And our topic today is about how your friends and families have influenced your sexuality. So a few things before we start. I want to remind you to type your questions into the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box, and I'll answer them as we go along. And also be sure to leave us your book reviews or comments on Amazon for What Turns You On. As with Mirror of Intimacy, for those of you that have been fans over the years, let us know what you love about the workbook, how you're using it, what's been fun for you, maybe challenging for you. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like this video and to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below, so that way you never miss a post. And you can also keep up with what we're doing by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. So you'll see a bunch of things coming up in the chat box now that tells you where to find the workbook, if you want to get our daily meditations. Also, all of our social links are there as well. And this webinar series is meant to explore aspects of the workbook, What Turns You On, a guide to living your best sex life. It's designed to help you get really honest with yourself about how you define sex, and that way so that you can enjoy the kind of touch that you like, the sexual activities that you really enjoy, and so you can have an explicit and meaningful exchange with a sexual partner. So often we're left kind of fumbling along, not knowing exactly what we're supposed to do or when we're supposed to do it, or we're doing things that we once used to do or liked, but they're not really working for us sexually anymore. So this idea of updating your sexual script is something I've been very interested in, because I do believe these preferences change over time. They wax, they wane, we get more courageous. And we might get more courageous, but our bodies might be less cooperative. So it's a constantly changing tapestry, our sex lives. So what we're going to do today is just start, from the very beginning by looking at this question of what are the ways that friends and family influence our sexuality. So when I think about families, I think that in, the very best circumstances, a family will provide their children security and warmth, and a place to flourish with attentive adults who are stewarding their young children into adulthood. And that's a tall order because a lot of people struggle with growing up in households that were less than nurturing, and anything less than nurturing is considered abusive. So when we don't grow up in those ways, when we grow up in less than favorable circumstances or less than nurturing environments, families can be a place of uncertainty and even danger. And to grow into a sexually healthy adult, children need family members who support them in their endeavors, their sexual orientation, their spiritual exploration, and other personal choices without judgment. So just think about that. Were you really championed to explore your sexual orientation? Maybe that wasn't even an issue for you as a child, but if it was, what about your spiritual exploration? Or were you like me, just baptized into a faith and expected that that was going to be my faith for the rest of my life with blind obedience, because that's often what faith traditions require, as opposed to a space that maybe was spiritual or the adults practiced a particular faith and offered it to their kids, but also let their kids know that there was a space for exploration. And what other personal choices were you interested in without judgment, or was it judged? Today, I heard someone say that this world of perfectionism we live in, high levels of competition, does nothing but stress us out, sometimes to the point of serious chronic pain in the body, because we learn to bind up our feelings, to suppress our emotions, to go along, to get along. And before we know it, we have all sorts of ailments that doctors really can't find the answer to. And that the true test for all of us is to pursue that which makes us happy. Did anybody in your family say, just do what makes you happy? Or were you shoved into a schedule that was highly demanding with high expectations? And then kids get into perfectionism, and then perfectionism gets into high anxiety, which gets into eating disorders and a whole host of other problems that the culture then also puts weight on. And in that, the child, the young person, cannot in any way, shape, or form be able to figure out what their own sexuality is. So here's a question for you. How did you learn, or what did you learn about sex from your parents? What did you learn about sex from your parents? And I often get a whole host of answers about that. Um, like nothing, or I didn't ever see my parents even touch, or there was no affection whatsoever, or they gave us the message of don't do it, or sex is dirty, save it for marriage, which is a bizarre message also. Or some people grew up in, overly sexualized, chaotic environments where they could hear their parents having sex all the time, or their parents were inappropriately nude in front of them. So sex became something that was really icky or felt like it was an impingement on them. So there's a vast continuum of experiences people have, but I want you to take a moment to think about what you learned from sex from your parents. Did you ever have the talk? And if you did have the talk, what did they say? Some people will say that they got a very clinical talk because their parent was a nurse or a doctor. Other people got books. Some people, again, got nothing. Other people got TMI. And today, I think parents think that well, there's a saying that if you think it's time to talk to your kids about sex, it's too late, because remember, the average age of pornography viewing is 8 years old in our country today. So parents really have to stay one step or two steps ahead of their children in order to support them developmentally towards a healthy sexuality. So, what did your parents say, and what did you say? Did you say anything? Were you holding your breath? Were you just freaked out? Were you just wanting it to be over? And what effect did that whole experience have on you about the talk? Did it make you feel better or more shame, or just embarrassed that your parents were so awkward and uncomfortable themselves about it? So take a few minutes right now as I pause to maybe jot down some notes. If you don't have the workbook, just jot down some notes to yourself to ask yourself, what messages did I get about sex from my family? How did that impact me in the moment? How has that impacted me over time? Have I ever deconstructed those messages to find out what's really true for me? So, when it comes to friends, we know now that deep, grounded friendships often last longer than any other kind of connection. And I remember when I was dating in my 20s, I had a friend, I got a new boyfriend, and she said, don't worry, he won't be your boyfriend for long. And when he's gone, I'll still be here. And that really struck me because it was true. Boyfriends came and go, but girlfriends seemed to be forever if they were really good friends. And new friends bring an excitation to our lives, a zest to life, a novelty to our lives, because they really ignite or reignite interests. They can get us interested in things we never thought we would be interested in, or remind us of things we used to love that have fallen by the wayside. And that can include sexual interests also. Like if you have a very daring friend sexually, or a friend who's not embarrassed or swaddled in shame about sex and sexuality, they're more free to talk about their orgasms or a new vibrator or something they just saw or a club or something they want to share with us. And that can make us feel much more vitally alive sexually. And friends, of course, can make us laugh hysterically and help us question our ideas about sex and sexuality in really fun and interesting ways. And those fun and interesting ways usually inspire a sense of play. And that play inspires a form of delight in getting to know that person. So having a new good friend can be as exciting as having a new good girlfriend or boyfriend or lover. But over time, that new friend becomes a close friend, right? And if we're lucky, a best friend, and over time, an old friend. And if we're really lucky, our best friend can sometimes become our longtime love. So think about the friends that you have had in the past that really inspired you towards being a better person, being more alive sexually. And who are your close friends now? It's often easy to think that we don't really have any friends because we're not extending ourselves towards the people that are already in our lives. And feeling isolated or like we don't have friends can really be a victim stance. Like, poor me, I'm not meeting new people. I don't go out enough. I don't go to the right places. Nobody loves me, all of that. So take stock of the current friends you have. How much do you, excuse me, invest in them, get involved with them, make plans with them, and really remind yourself what you liked about them to begin with? And have you ever had a really good friend that turned into a lover? Or did you ever marry your best friend or get involved with your best friend? And so, who were your close friends growing up? Like your best friends in the second grade, fifth grade, ninth grade, high school. Who are your very best friends? And who are your close friends growing up in young adulthood as you turned into a teenager, um, as you became 18, 19, 20 years old? And if you didn't have friends, what effect did that have on your sexual development? What did that have on your sexual development? What is that doing to you now if you don't have friends? Because before the internet, let's say before 1990, to be generous, um, if you didn't have friends, you were super isolated because it was really hard to find a way to connect with people. In fact, it sort of forced us to go out of our houses and make friends and find ways to be friendly with people. Today, there's a whole host of online options for making friends, but how did those friends impact your sexual development, or the lack of friends impact your sexual development? And can you rely on current friends for advice and care? And do you reach out to those people and use them in the ways that I was talking about? Use them as friends. If we're afraid to ask for help, then we won't get what we want to need. And people are not going to mind read, and they're not going to come towards us, and they're not going to come find us. We have to reach out and make the invitation. And when you make an invitation, if it's not reciprocal, if it doesn't come back, then that person is not a friend and you should move on. So if you're always saying to somebody, let's get together, and then you actually reach toward them and say, hey, let's get together this weekend and go for a walk on the beach or go have coffee, or there's a new restaurant, or I want to go hear music at this club, or any number of other things. It's one thing if that person says, yeah, I can't do that now. But if they're constantly putting you off, that's a no. Or if you have somebody in your life that's always saying, yeah, let's get together, but they never make plans, they're always reliant on you to make plans, then that's probably going to be a no also. You don't want to be working harder than your friend unless your friend is really debilitated and that's the agreement you have. If you are friends with someone who's elderly or has a chronic illness, that's a different story. But if somebody's as able-bodied as you are, you want it to be a reciprocity. It's sort of like a good tennis match. You hit the ball this weekend, they hit it the next weekend. Sometimes they extend themselves a little bit more because it's a special event, and then down the road, you extend yourself a little bit more. But take a moment to think about whether you can rely on current friends for advice and care, and jot down any notes about that. And now take a moment to think about your earliest memory related to sex. What was your earliest memory related to sex? It doesn't have to be a sexual act or experience either. It can be the first time you heard the word sex, or you saw a body and felt aroused. Maybe it was your sister changing her clothes, or your mother in her nightgown, or you saw a boy when you were walking by his house and you didn't mean to look in the backyard, but there he was and he was changing out of his swimsuit. Like any number of things could have happened. For some people, their first experience of sexual arousal was on television. That they saw some superhero or heroine, and that person was really exciting to them, and they didn't know why. So this can be, as I said, something suggestive you saw in the media, and it can be a positive or negative experience also. So when you had that experience, were you with somebody or were you alone? Was it awkward because you were watching TV on the couch with your parents and then some beautiful male or female came on TV and you had this electric experience and you didn't know what it was, but you didn't say anything? Or were you alone and overwhelmed and feeling ashamed, like that shouldn't have happened, or you didn't know what to do with the experience? Certainly, if your first sexual experience was one of being molested or tampered with, that's a whole other experience that changes circuitry in the brain and in the body that orients us towards high arousal and high shame sometimes. So, what was that first experience that set you up or colored or primed your body and mind for sex and sexuality? And did you tell anybody about that experience ultimately? Did you tell a family member? Did you tell a friend? Or did you keep it to yourself? And if you kept it to yourself, for how long? And what impact did the experience have on you? What impact did keeping the secret have on you for so long? How did it inform your sexuality? How did it distort it? How did it change your sexuality? So we have a question here. I'm an older male who learned at age 14 that my father was bisexual. When I stumbled upon some of his adult reading material, many years later, I realized that I also am bisexual. Is my bisexuality nature or nurture? Well, I wonder why that matters if it's really simpatico with who you are. We know that everything is both nature and nurture now. Nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, it's rare that people are on the extreme end of the continuum, that they are 100% heterosexual or 100% homosexual. There are a whole bunch of people in the middle of the bell curve that are bisexual or fluid in their sexuality. And they're open to experiences and willing to try things. So if your father was bisexual, that might have been his true nature, and maybe that was your true nature too. Then seeing the pornography could have given you permission to feel less odd or different. And like, oh, if my dad's this way, it's okay for me to be this way too. So if that's a question that's bothering you, I would recommend that you explore it more deeply in your own journaling or in therapy, if it's particularly problematic or bothersome to you. And then the second part of the question is I've never explored my bisexuality with men, mainly due to fears of HIV infection and because I'm heteroromantic. Aha. That said, my sex life with women has not been very satisfying. Would it be worth it for me to explore my male-male fantasies given the STI, STD risks? Well, exploring your fantasies by way of erotic material is harm-free generally. And I would caution you not to get onto the slippery slope of watching excessive pornography or erotica. So you started to get your primary sexual needs met by the computer. because that will distort your experience, in a relationship with somebody. There are bisexuality groups here in LA at the LGBT Q Center. There is a group that was around pre-pandemic. I believe it was called the Biosphere, or the Bisphere. It's probably more accurate. So there are groups for people exploring bisexuality where you can just go and talk about it with like-minded people to see if it's a fit before you make a foray out into the community and trying to meet a male to have sex with. I don't recommend that you just hook up with somebody on an app and have it, anonymous sex that way, because that is going to increase your level of jeopardy and exposure with danger, both, not knowing who the person is, because this is a particularly tender time for you and vulnerable time for you, but also because of the danger of contracting STIs. So take it slowly, investigate it further. I applaud your willingness to get curious about this and to start to stretch the possibilities for yourself, to see what's there for you. But please do it with caution, and do it with discernment. And thank you for that question. Someone writes here, I'm a man, but I tend to want to make friends with women. Many of those have not remained long-term friends, which I lament. Is it important better to have same-sex friends? It sounded like your friends are women and they support your female experience and exploration. Well, I do think it's important to have same-sex friends, whatever your orientation is, and opposite-sex friends. So I would suggest that you make sure that when you meet women that you think would be a good friend, that you start to talk about a friendship, an opposite-sex friendship, and what that's like for them, and what your expectations are of the friendship. And why you're looking for a nice long-term female friendship with no strings attached, no sex involved, that you just want companionship, and see if you find the right female for that. And then I do think male friendships are important, and oftentimes men bond over activities, like sports activities or common interests. And so find males that share your interest. It doesn't mean that you have to play baseball, but maybe you like baseball, so you go to baseball games together. So find things that you have in common that move you towards those experiences of bonding and companionship. Certainly going to movies is something you can do with a friend of any orientation or gender. Someone writes, I grew up in a highly fundamental religion where any sexuality outside of marriage was ultimately taboo. I've been in SA recovery for over a decade now, though my marriage, which is ending, now for the first time in my life, trying to understand how to integrate sexuality as a part of myself as a person. But my history means everything falls into two buckets: consensual sex in a marriage or dark, secretive acting out to porn or something. I know healthy integration is somewhere in between, but I struggle a lot to get in touch with okay versus not. I'm trying to get in touch with what's true for me, but those external historical voices are often so loud. Any recommendations? Well, I do suggest that you start with doing some work yourself, writing. You could certainly look at my workbook, Sexual Reflections, which was specifically written for people in recovery from sex addiction, and you can find that on Amazon. And that you also maybe start to talk to a good sex addiction therapist. So Sexual Reflections just appeared in the chat box. You can click that link and it'll take you to that workbook. That's probably a better workbook for you than What Turns You On. And then find a sex addiction therapist who can talk to you about healthy sexuality and recovery. But it sounds like you probably need to do some more trauma work around unpacking the shame that religion put on your sexuality from day one. Because until you are free from that shame or any shame, it's very difficult to be sexually free and sexually healthy. You can't do it. You're going to be self-conscious during sex, and then you will struggle with arousal, erection, performance, all of it. So this is really an inside job. And it's work that you have to do on yourself before you can engage with somebody else. My female partner of 11 years and I, also female, just broke up. I'm sorry to hear that. That's a long-term relationship. The sexual component of our relationship has been non-existent for years, and I believe we stayed together as long as we did because we've been best friends. That often happens. What advice do you have regarding healing through the feelings of rejection around this kind of experience so that my next relationship can be more sexually fulfilling and maintained? Well, I think one of the things that happens in long-term committed relationships is we stop talking about sex. And when we stop talking about sex, we stop having sex. And it's very easy to become comfortable and deep friends and have a deep and profound love for each other, but there's no spark there, there's no sexuality there. So you have to be having ongoing, constant conversations about sex. And it's not just about what we like and what we want. It's about, hey, we're not having sex right now. Okay, yeah, we're not. Here's why I'm not. Here's why you're not. So we can hold that space with each other for good reason, but also talk about, are we still attracted to each other? If not, why not? What kind of sex do we wish we were having? And this, of course, is what what turns you on, helps you start to ferret out. Like you have to get super clear about what you like sexually and what you don't, what scares you, what stops you from being sexual, what you want to explore. And only then can you start to have those conversations with people you're dating. And then once you get into a deeper commitment, is that person committed to their sexuality also? Because a lot of people are great sexually when they're dating. And then once they get into a relationship, it just goes by the wayside. And often that's true because they really weren't into sex that much to begin with. And so they lied about that by omission. And maybe some of us have done that also. They just weren't into sex. They were sexual because it was new and novel and exciting. But over time, you know, people can have a lot of sexual issues that they have not unraveled and looked at, and they carry it into the next relationship and the next relationship. And sex dies over and over again because people are not honest with themselves about what turns them on, what they like, what they want, what they're afraid of. And that is the invitation that this workbook and I am making to you in these conversations. So all of you have written these really beautiful and vulnerable questions, and the answers all go back to you. Are you willing to do the tough work of looking at your sexuality and looking at your anxiety that blocks your sexuality and start to get honest with yourself about maybe I am bisexual. What would it mean about me if I liked having sex with men if I'm a man? What would people think of me? What would I think of me? How am I going to do this safely? What world am I going to be in? All of it about how am I not going to repeat what I did before? Because it's very easy to blame your partners that you've broken up with. They didn't do this and they didn't do that and they were uptight sexually, but that leaves us in a victim position. And so if you want to get out of a victim position, you always have to turn the light on yourself and say, what was my part in that? How did I let that go on for so long? Why did I let it go on for so long? And if I see that I did it for good reason or I was tolerating something, okay, that was what it was and I learned from it, but what am I going to do differently now? So these are the kind of questions that I want you to keep asking yourself over the time that we have these conversations, and to start thinking about how have my friends and family influenced my sexuality? What are the things that I have done to be a party to why my sex life has fallen off a cliff at times, or why I even cheated? And what do I want to do differently today? Who do I want to be today? Because it's never too late to start or to reinvent your sexuality. So make that a fun summer project, or just make it a fun project for the month of July to answer these questions. And so I look forward to hearing from you next month when we reconvene in August. So for now, I hope you have a beautiful July and a happy July 4th, that you think about independence of your sexuality. What does it mean for you to be independent sexually and to unleash your sexuality to yourself? and find out who you are. And I look forward to hearing from you when we next meet in July. All right, take good care and see you then.